2 weeks ago, a 6-year-old at Rich Neck Elementary School in Newport News, Virginia, brought a gun to school and shot a teacher, later identified as Abby Zwerner. She just sustained life-threatening injuries but is in stable condition. But the community is still reeling from the fact that not only was this a school shooting, but the act was done by a child as young as 6. Reports are now out that the gun was a legally purchased weapon belonging to the mother of the child. Let's watch what police had to say on the matter.
Mrs. Zwerner was providing class instruction. The 6-year-old child displayed a firearm, pointed it at her, and fired one round. There was no physical struggle or fight. She was providing instruction to her class. There was one round fired. Abigail took a defensive position, and what I'm sharing with you is because she has allowed me to share it. She took a defensive position where she raised her hand. The round went through her hand, exited the rear of her hand, and into her upper chest. And that's as far as I'm going to go with that. I'm not a physician.
Well, really horrible thing. Obviously, reading the news reports, it sounds like this was a gun that was legally purchased by the 6-year-old's mother. We don't know where it was being kept in the house, if it was left out, if the 6-year-old had easy access to it. Virginia does not, it appears, have a law necessarily criminalizing, not securing a gun in that manner. However, there have been successful charges in Virginia and elsewhere. Again, you could theoretically charge the parents for child services kind of issue,
like criminal neglect.
Yeah, neglecting the child by putting them in that kind of situation. Obviously, you can't, I'm reading, it sounds like you can't really charge a 6-year-old with anything, is what it sounds like, because they're not deemed fit to stand trial.
Right.
They said even a juvenile, and I don't know how you feel about that. I don't know what to say about that, frankly.
Yeah, look, I think that there are a lot of cases with minors where this exact situation is implicated. I don't know at what age. I think there's a broad public consensus that a 6-year-old can't have the mens rea to actually try to commit a murder. Does a 7-year-old? Does an 8-year-old? Mm-hmm. Does a 13-year-old? At what point does it switch over to a place where we're going to start treating children who commit adult crimes as adults? Too often in this country, despite there being separate rules and criminal justice practices for minors, it is bizarrely easy to get a minor treated as an adult in the criminal justice system, and it really betrays what we establish. Not at 6, but it betrays that feeling that we have as a society, that despite having rules in place that acknowledges that the cognitive development of kids is not the same as adults, that the responsibility that they should have in these situations is not the same as adults, all too often minors, and I have to say this, specifically minors that are Black and brown, get treated very differently and criminalized in our society. We see video after video. There were a whole string of them last week of a police officer beating on a 14-year-old Black girl who was accused of something that didn't require her being beaten down on the sidewalk in the broad light of day. And it is a concern for me and a lot of people that when you have an extreme case like this and someone who is very, very young, there's an acknowledgement that they are in fact a child. If the fact pattern changes even slightly, suddenly we're very eager to say, well, this was a real adult crime. Let's forget the fact that they're a baby. I mean, these are children.
It was a real adult crime, but the person doing it is not
a real adult. And we acknowledge should be treated differently in the criminal justice system. I mean, what do you make of this? Virginia is a state, obviously, a conservative mm-hmm. state where there have been a lot of battles around gun control. Parents obviously have these countervailing investments in public safety for their children in their schools, and also the right to be armed, to buy firearms. What do you make if it's true that there's this real trade-off here? If it's true that this gun was even safely secured and the child managed to get into it regardless, do you think that's going to evolve a conversation about what gun laws should be if these kind of tragic events can still happen? Or is this going to be considered an outlier and just kind of the price you have to pay for these broader freedoms?
I think does matter in what circumstances the 6-year-old was able to obtain the gun. If it was just left out, I could see, and I'm not sure what the law specifically allows in Virginia. As someone who supports gun rights and people being able to legally purchase firearms, I would not be uncomfortable with if a gun carelessly left out where a young child can get it, charging even the parent or the gun owner with a kind of maybe like a negligent homicide or an involuntary manslaughter. The same way if you recklessly drove a car and you got someone killed, you could be charged with something even if it's if it wasn't, you didn't mean to kill him, you didn't want to kill someone, or you could contribute to a workplace safety accident in a construction site or something. If you really screw up or you do something that was not smart, that's fine. That doesn't trouble me. I don't know if Virginia law exactly allows for that. It sounds like it allows for holding the parents accountable in some sense for putting the kid in danger. I mean, you could have a gun left out for a kid of that age. They could shoot themselves. They could, So
yeah.
So I don't think that necessarily puts gun control or you could want this situation resolved some kind of legal way. I think without being for some vast new kind of gun control regime.
Yeah, I mean, and this makes me reflect on the case of Tamira Rice in Cleveland, of course, also, who was just 12 years old and who did not have a real firearm. He was just playing with a toy gun in the park. Police drove by and shot him fatally. And it makes me also ask, what would have happened if this child hadn't been able to be immediately disarmed in the context of the classroom? What if law enforcement had come in? What do we expect of law enforcement in the situation? Is there a situation where we would have wanted the law enforcement to shoot the 6-year-old kid? Would it have difference if the teacher had actually died from her wounds? She had very serious wounds, and it was a very likely possibility.
Well, this is going to go to our conversation yesterday. Yes, I would say police or anyone else would be justified in stopping. It's horrible to contemplate, but a 6-year-old with lethal force, if they're they're in the act of shooting someone with a gun.
Well, the situation between, the difference between the yesterday's situation and this situation is that the child is younger in this situation, but of course the other situation yesterday where we were talking about a alleged and prospective car theft is not a lethal situation. So there's an intervention with lethal force.
But a car theft can become a lethal situation if you try to stop them.
Well, now
from
we're in a
stealing your car.
minority report situation where a bystander who projects that a car is going to be stolen and might have lethal consequences takes it upon themselves outside of the criminal justice system and the legal justice system to go ahead and assassinate a 13-year-old on the side of the road. So all of that being said, I think that there's a more important conversation, especially when the police are involved, an important conversation to be had about what the police's obligations are, whether or not they should be acting impulsively in ways that protect their own safety, like we saw in Uvalde, and not willing to sacrifice and do what they're supposed to do in the line of duty, to use as much non-lethal force to disarm a situation and to protect people, which is often the case. These are not easy questions, but I appreciate talking about this case because it really foregrounds the extent to which the goal should be protection of and maximization of life. Well, and it's hard. Yeah.
But the police have, I think, a special obligation, unlike somewhat, what we talked about yesterday with the 13-year-old, the car situation. The police, not involved in that situation or this situation, but the police are supposed to have training to be able to hopefully resolve a dangerous situation without loss of life, even by the person, even if there's a legitimacy to aggressing against a person. The Tamira Rice example, so there was no legitimacy. Tamira Rice did not have this was a kid in a park who had a toy gun, and the police in that instance should have been able to approach him in a way and then identify that there was no danger, that it was not a real gun. They did not approach him correctly, and they violated training protocol. And in fact, the officer who shot him had been previously fired from the police force.
Yeah.
He was fired from a previous police force for incompetence with firearms. Yeah. And he was rehired at a different police force. That's a huge issue.
It is a huge issue. And the thing you were saying earlier also about the potential of a car accident and high-speed chases, there was also just a recent case, I think a week or two ago, where a Louisiana police officer who was engaged in a high-speed car chase. Again, there are these property crimes that police are pursuing, and recklessly, they fatally struck and killed 2 young teenage girls a deeply tragic event. So because there's this interest in resolving this property crime, I think it was also a car theft where you have the license plates, you can track it down later, there's surveillance. We just saw what happened with the case in Idaho where they were able to track the car plates all the way across the country. You know, why engage in this high-risk behavior? Why are the police engaging in this high-risk behavior when it's absolutely not necessary? So I do think, I think that there has to be a reevaluation of the cost-benefit of certain kind of policing actions and vigilante actions, especially when life is not at risk. In this situation with a 6-year-old, it's just an incredibly tragic and difficult to resolve issue.
According to the New York Times, it is against Virginia law to leave a loaded gun somewhere accessible to children under 14. No charges, however, have been filed as of yet. More rising after this.